Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast on workforce health, literacy, and well-being. My name's Seth Serxner. I'm Chief Health Officer at EdLogics. I'm really happy to have a conversation today with a longtime colleague and friend, Jennifer Fann, who is the SVP lead at Aon in their health solution business. And Jen, I hope I said that correctly. It's really great. We've had a number of conversations in the past couple of months. It's been really nice. But I'd love for you to just tell people a little bit about your career path and what that role means, what I just gave the title for.
Yeah, you bet. And so I'm the health solutions business leader here in Atlanta for Aon. And I get really excited about that. What that means is I get to lead a lot of organizations, a lot of commercial projects. Certainly, I lead our business that's here, but that's all focused around delivering workforce health and workforce outcomes. And so that's what I get really passionate about is how do we structure different types of strategies so that we can help organizations thrive and continue to do what they need to do for their overall business strategy.
Fantastic. And remind me, I think we first met way back in Mercer days. I hate to say Mercer when you're an Aon person now.
Yeah.
And a little bit about your just kind of how this career path, how you got to be where you are.
Yeah. So it's okay to say Mercer. We have lots of friends who are there, have lots of friends inside Aon. As they say, it takes a village. And so, I think that it's continued to really just evolve. And so spent some time when you and I worked together leading health and productivity as one of the leaders together. I was in the Southeast, you were in the Northeast, but from there have, moved on to really think about workforce health, but really kind of human capital and what we do in and around some of those strategies. And so I've spent time at Aon in the last 5 years of how can we support that. So there are macro trends that are occurring within human capital, but there's macro trends of how that fits inside just kind of greater business organizations and how we manage risk overall.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about that. Although I do want to mention that I know in all this, you've also furthered your education and MBA and have wanted to make sure you had some of the skills and tools to further that mission.
That's right. That's right. So thank you. So I did go back, spent some time with colleagues at Harvard inside their business school, and really just wanted it to be foundational for organizations. So as we think of organizations advancing, especially around technology and the digital transformation that we're all experiencing, right? And we're at the beginning stages of that. But how do we do that in the macro environment in which we exist? So we have geopolitical pressures that are going on, technological issues that are going on. We certainly have talent issues that are going on. But then how do we ground that in really good business principles? So spend a lot of time in accounting, both US and as well as international, lots of economic discussions. We studied the 8 largest economies across the globe. And what does that come back to? And again, my passion is around human capital and people. And so we ended each of those case studies saying the greatest capital is our human capital, which certainly aligns with what I do and what I love.
Again, this is just so perfect. I was looking forward to this conversation. And we will bring this back to, you and I both did a lot of back in the day, it was ROI. Let's prove the value of this. So, of course, saying human capital is great. And I know you're a numbers person and a metrics person. So as we get into this conversation, what is it that as a business, everybody can say, oh, yeah, our people are our foundation. You hear that all the time, but then you don't see the investment in it sometimes. And you wonder, well, what's going on there? I thought you said people and human capital are important. So talk a little bit about this human capital approach.
And so why is human capital good for business? I think what we know from some of the research that's out there is that if we're able to increase well-being across a workforce and increase it, it can be in small increments, so at least 3%, then we know that we have lower turnover that's happening by 1%. We know that for the overall affordability of a workforce, that really improves as well. We know that the satisfaction of actually working within an organization increases 1 to 2% as well. So you think about net promoter scores that are out there, or when individuals are out on Glassdoor and other types of platforms speaking about your brand and where people want to work. And especially right now, while we have so much around that talent piece, getting the right talent in your door, it just matters. It allows organizations to go further, faster. One of the things that was very interesting to me is that in this year at the Davos Forum, our friends at PwC, they did a survey of what CEOs are really focused on. And 45% of CEOs came back and said, hey, we're not sure that my organization will be around in 10 years. And so there's lots of factors that go into that. But what's really interesting about that is around talent, right? It's also around technology. It's around some of the geopolitical macro trends, the economy that's going on. But what we know is that when you have the right talent in place, it allows you to execute against some of those strategies. And so I think that that's part of what has elevated that whole attraction and retention for CEOs, that it's really at top of mind. And again, because there's so much change that's happening, right? So one of the greatest determinants is, do you have a workforce that can manage change?
But just the other side of it is, I thought you talk mostly to benefits people. So
Oh,
do
yeah.
benefits people, or at least our audience deals a lot with benefits, maybe
Right.
even a broader purview, because this talent thing makes perfect sense to me, and incredible kind of statistics about more well-being, better retention, things like that. But a typical kind of benefits person focused on health, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure they make that connection, Jen. Can you talk a little
Sure.
bit
Well,
about
so I think that the market's shifting. So we
that? Okay.
do see our benefits team and our chief people officer, they have a seat at the table. And so they're part of strategic planning. If we would rewind the clock, 20, 30 years ago, I don't want to date the two of us because we've been at this a long time. Maybe it's a little bit different, but I do see the chief people officers having a role at the table. We have chief diversity officers, chief sustainability officers. The world has changed, is my point. So if we talk about then benefits and then health, so now within human capital, where is health placed? And so focusing on well-being is critical to it. Focusing on affordability is really critical, and attraction and retention. And so again, how do we get people in the door and how do we keep them? And I have to keep them really resilient. A great example of that, just to kind of bring this to life, is that if we're
Mhm.
thinking about the healthcare industry, we had over 200,000 registered nurses leave the workforce between 2020 and 2022. And so 200,000, that's a big number.
It's a big
And
number.
so then some of them came back, some of them did not. Some of them were repurposed into other types of roles that they later on went to pursue. But all of that is to say that when we're thinking about the delivery of health and those organizations, having those registered nurses and that skill set is really critical. Now, we could take that same kind of statistics, whether it's manufacturing or it's technology, whatever it is, there's lots of different data points that would reside in that. But all of that comes back to, we need healthy, functional people who can be really resilient and tolerate change fast. So therein lies why well-being is so important, and it's pervasive across all of these topics that we're talking about.
So that theme of resilience, it's funny. It was very big during COVID. Everybody was doing resilient training and all this thing. And I appreciate it, the idea of being able to kind of bounce back, right? And then the more you lose your reserves, the less resilient you are, the less able you are to bounce back. There was some conversation that said it's not really fair to kind of, in a sense, blame the individual for not being resilient when there are other forces that are just going to keep slapping that person down. Let's face it, you can be pretty
Right.
strong. But so, how do you deal with the context in which people are trying to remain resilient?
Sure. So I think it's being able to identify for each of those organizations or each of those individuals, what kind of support do they need? And just to say it, your starting point matters. So whether we're talking it on an individual basis, a team basis, or an organization basis, your starting point matters. And so how engaged are you already? What is your disease burden? Where do you fit within the organization? And so those things are key. But then what are some of the advocacy programs that are inside of that? That then we use that to help people move forward and move forward in a way that gets them to their best health. An example of that would be, so, again, one of the strategies that we use is segmenting the population. So not a new strategy, but as we think about diabetes within the workforce, right? And so that can be a whole range of individuals or where they fall, but diabetes reversal is one of those things that's really critical. So being able to help address that. But as you move on and you may gather other kinds of chronic diseases, then how you deal with your diabetes, that starts to change over time, right? Your risk factors change over time. So I just share like that one little snippet to say that it's not one strategy. There is no silver bullet. I did have someone say to me, there's not a silver bullet, but there's a lot of silver BBs. And we gather those over time, right? To say, then how do we help support people inside of that? So I think really being able to segment the population is an important one for us. Working on affordability is absolutely key. And so there's a lot of people who sit inside plans who just simply can't afford their deductible or their out of pocket or some of those sorts of things. So I think that that's really important to us. And then getting access to care. Again, there's lots of care deserts that people sit and live in. And so the different modalities in which people access care, those are going to continue to evolve. So it's not just one lever that you're pulling, but it's really trying to be able to put those together to address the workforce that you have today. But then ultimately, what are you asking them to do? So resiliency is, bouncing back. So that's important. I would also say agility is being able to bounce forward. So not just bounce back, but bounce forward.
Oh,
And so
that's
then that's
nice. Okay, there's a little
that's
something for you.
that's right.
Agility.
That's helping people thrive because that's really where we're headed, especially in all the technology changes that are coming along. And just to say it, what I need to bounce forward is different than what you need to bounce forward. And I think that as we're talking about organizations, we have so many generations that are in the workforce right now. And so they need something a little bit different, and that's okay. I think that brings me to my next point, which is it's not just about the workforce resiliency or agility or just the affordability, but it's how do we personalize this? And so across the board, everything that we're doing, it's personalized, personalized, personalized. And so technology is allowing us to do a lot of that. It's being able to meet, that individual where they are. So some things we're still carrying in from how we've done this for 20 years. So meeting individuals where they are. And then how do we then help educate them? How do we surround people around them? How do we enable them with new technologies that's in that moment? I think is really important. And so one of the tenets that we try to use that I'm a big proponent of is this is not a technology play. There's lots of what I'm going to call shiny baubles that are in the marketplace of just saying, just turn this on and it's all good. What I know is that humans value that human connection and that human touch. And so we're going to deploy lots of different technologies and solutions. That's great. But what's really key to us is also having that human element to come alongside people. I'm in the camp of we've got a lot of AI and technology, but that's going to augment that human to human relation and how we help move people forward. And then I think the last piece of it is keep it simple. This starts to lead into some of your health literacy pieces. There's so much that's out there, and we have a lot of content, and it's delivered in different ways, but having really simple bites that people can absorb I think is really important. And so, if we think about prevention, and so I love the topic of prevention, just did a health forum on food as medicine. So
Sure.
spent a lot of time in that, but keeping it really simple of, eat more vegetables, don't eat too much, lower or stay away from sugars and processed food. Now, we could go talk about 40 different diet fads that are out there. We talk about dieting as a verb. I like to talk about diet as a noun. This is my diet. And just to say it, it's changed over my time, right? So what I was able to eat and do 30 years ago, I can no longer eat and do because, we continue to evolve and change. So I think that some of those pieces are really key. So focus on affordability, access, that personalization, keep it simple.
Really nice principles. Thank you for teeing up the health literacy. But before we go there, one of the challenges has always been this, all this is great, but how do I get people to engage? And I know different modalities, personalization, but touch on culture and leadership and how to drive real engagement because we see many companies trying their best and having lots of these resources and not having as much engagement or success as they would like, whatever their benchmark is. So how do you go about that part of it?
Sure. So I think some of those principles that we just talked about are really key. So you're at a certain point, we have to get to how do we personalize this? And then how do we chunk that down into bite sizes? Having senior leadership buy in, that is still really key. And having senior leadership say that this is part of our culture and taking care of our people is key. So cultures where we have people stand up and say, we are going to take care of our people. It's different. It matters. Having someone come walk alongside you matters. An example of that is David Cordani, who is the CEO at Cigna, right? So he's run many marathons. He partners with the Wounded Warriors Project, the Achilles Association. I follow him as one of my influencers. And the reason why I do that is that inside of that organization, he has stood up and said, we are going to take care of our people. This is what matters to us. And it matters in the physical health sense and the mental health sense, but it also matters in developing community. So when you're here, you're part of a community, but we're also here to serve another community. So again, I don't work for Cigna. I follow him because of his influences
Mhm.
that he has
Yeah.
across our industry. But that's like one example of how culture then I think plays into that. I think there's lots that we can do around incentives. They're still here. Whether you do that as a true incentive, as an award, or punitive, there's lots of debate, which we won't have time for here. But people do that in different ways. What I would share is that you're competing against a lot of noise. So in people's everyday life, you're competing against a lot of noise. I see that myself. I'm a mom of teenagers and young adults, and the kitchen table is noisy. And so being able to say, how do we get messages to the kitchen table and that start to change people's lives, that matters. It's one of the reasons why that we focused on food as medicine during our health forum here in Atlanta. And so, if we can start to change some of those most basic principles of just eating and what we take home to our families, how we get access to whole foods and fresh produce, we think that that is a game changer. And we do know that for people who ascribe to a healthier, simplistic diet, that we do watch them come off medications. We watch them, lower their A1Cs, their weight management is way down. There's lots of goodness that comes from that. So I think that, all of those strategies are on the table.
Yeah, really helpful. And, the leader at Cisco talked about his own mental health issues and really
Mhm.
trying to address that. We've done a lot in that space with leaders talking about mental and emotional well-being. So I do agree with you that there's an important message from leaders in management. And then I also, for me, the whole food approach, one thing that I like to talk about is if you can even cook with your family once or twice a week, where you put down all the technology and you're just yakking away with each other and figuring out how to make whatever you're making and just talking, things come up, right? That's when your kids, your family, your partner, whoever are kind of mentioning things and there's no distraction. So I like that little practice of it might just be an hour and a half, twice a week, but a lot can get done during that. So I think food can be a really nice kind of unifying approach.
Yeah, and food has been so nourishing just across the centuries, right? When we come together as people around food, so that's not by coincidence. And so I think that as we think about our own family and our own health, that matters. I think as you carry that into teams and organizations, how you come together just as your food policy within organizations and how you do your team meetings, I think those on-site policies really matter. I think how leaders stand up and what they do and don't support, I think that really matters. There's great technology that's in the marketplace now with lifestyle accounts or cars that, money for food can go directly to those cards. So exactly at that moment that people need it, right? So you can use this on broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts. You can't use it on soda, right? So there's lots of that kind of personalized technology. It's a great example of how those two things come together that organizations can deploy together. And it's very educational.
Perfect. So, I'm big on this health literacy thing. You
Yeah.
alluded to it already. For me, I kind of look at health literacy as evolving from old school flat brochures, patient education, to now a very dynamic approach that can use gamified learning, personalization, and data to provide relevant topics. And of course, multimedia, the idea that everybody likes YouTube when they want to learn anything. So why aren't we doing more video clips? So having health literacy for me has been a real important theme and kind of horizontal across a lot of the kind of topics you mentioned. As we personalize, there's still such an important broad base of being able to understand, someone called it in one of my last episodes, science literacy. Like, how do you understand the data coming to us? Health literacy, mental health literacy. So the challenge, though, for me is as important as this sounds, and the data is irrefutable about how when people have better health literacy, they do better on many fronts. I'm still finding it tough to get traction in the employer space. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or insights on that.
Yeah, so I think that it's evolving for sure. And so what I like to tell people is what we consume matters. And that's at our table. So we've talked about that. But what we consume in media matters, right? What we consume in culturally matters. So consumption matters. And as we go around the globe and we work with large multinational organizations, right, they have different cultures in which they're trying to sift some of that through. I think across the globe, as you think about media and video, for some of the younger generations, so I think about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, video is tremendous, right? And so they see that, and part of their learning is just being able to consume information in that way. So I do think that it is evolving. What I would love to see more of is that, how do we serve up, if you will, pardon the
Mhm.
pun, but how do we serve up consumption of some of the content so that it is more personalized? And so, when you're, have a chronic condition, so what does that look like for that chronic condition specifically? So, if I have diabetes, then my sensitivity and managing my A1C and my glucose, all of that's going to be a little bit different than someone who may not have that condition. So being able to serve that up in a way that is really consumable, I think is important. And that it's not, that it continues to move that person along the continuum as they're taking care of themselves. I also think an important piece for this type of consumption and media is, what is our goal? And that is where getting the buy-in from my goal. So again, if I'm using that same example that I'm pre-diabetic, right, then that's very different than someone who's been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes for 10 years. But maybe I want to try to figure out, what does that reversal look like? What I'm serving up to them looks a little bit different. So again, I'm back to some of that personalization. I also think that the literacy part of it is not just the content or the modality. I think part of that is that in-person enabled or empowered to make a change. And so sometimes, right, this is back to that resiliency and agility. Sometimes you can do that on your own. And quite frankly, sometimes you just can't, and you need people to come alongside you. So being able to create that kind of psychologically safe environment to say, I need help here. I keep an easy button on my desk where, I need help here. And so having that culturally part of what we're trying to do, I also think is really important. So I'm looking forward to how this evolves over time and how our consumption will change over time.
And it does make sense as you laid out. And what I still find challenging is, and I'm sure there are other players out there, I just know the EdLogics platform does pretty much everything you talked about. Highly personalized, different formats, whether it's infographics or videos or a deep curriculum. And once you kind of start, it gets to know you, it'll personalize this. I just still not sure that employers see it as at the same level as an EAP or a health assessment or a diabetes reversal program. And I'm not quite sure how to elevate the conversation other than doing all these podcasts.
Well, so what I would say is that as we work with organizations, so I divide it into three different pieces. So
Sure.
strategically to say we have prevention, we have risk reduction, and we have treatment. And again, there's no silver bullet for any of that, but you do need strategies inside each of those. And so inside of prevention, it can't just be find a doc and, go have a conversation. And I'm not suggesting that people are trying to make it that simplistic, but sometimes we just kind of jump right over that prevention piece of it. I do think that working with employers so that they understand how foundational prevention is, inside of prevention is how foundational health literacy is. Because what we know is that when your health literacy is low, that we have increased ER visits, we have increased hospitalization, we have a decrease in medication adherence that's going on. And so all of that is really important. I think when you combine that with a couple important statistics, which is depending on the research, right? 50 to 90% of Americans, so now we're just talking domestic, but 50 to 90% of Americans have a low health literacy. So they literally don't know what to do. Now, if you look at all the advertising that comes at us, maybe that's not surprising. But I think when you combine that with people with low health literacy, that their spend on health in a year is 4 times that of someone with high literacy. Now back to that affordability issue. I have someone just from their health literacy score that they're 4 times more expensive. So I think having that as an underpinning of some of that conversation to say that we know that we can get to a better, more affordable, here sustainable place in our health plan, but also for individuals if we invest and try to raise health literacy for our population.
Well, you make my argument. Beautiful. I think that was well said. And I will say one thing that I do remember talk about silver linings of COVID. There was for a moment a big focus on prevention. Everyone said, oh, yeah, prevention. That's a good idea. I'd rather not get COVID. So let me prevent it. Let me get vaccinated. Let me clean my hands. Let me do all these things. And then it got to what else should we do in the prevention space? So I hope that that focus stays salient for folks. Jen, we've covered a lot of ground. You've laid things out just so articulately and logically. I so appreciate it. Anything we missed that you want to just touch on or anything you want to emphasize before we close out?
Sure. You know what? I would just say, I'm a glass half full kind of gal, and I would just tell people you can do this. And so you can do this for individuals, you can do this for teams, you can do this for organizations, you can do this. And then what I would just encourage people to do is to get some really good friends. And so you're going to need those along the way. So if whether that's at the organizational level, that's with some of these teams and team activities, or at the individual levels, who we do life with matters most. And so if there's one takeaway that I've learned throughout life is who we do this with really matters. And so I would get some really good friends, some really good, individuals around what you're trying to solve. And just, again, I'm always a glass half full, but I think the future's really bright. I think where we're headed around prevention, where we're headed around risk reduction, making some of this more simple and personalized, there's just so much on the horizon that I think is going to enable a lot of this conversation. So I'd love to come back to you in a year's time and say, now here's where we are. So the future's bright.
Well, we definitely will do that. I appreciate the positive note. I'm glad that you're one of my friends in my network. I also really appreciated that theme of what we consume matters. We talk about people as consumers. I like to talk about people as people, but people do consume things, all kinds of things. So lots of nice themes. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.